A month ago, Oliver's life was almost flawless, steady, predictable, built like a staircase step by step. He didn't call it happiness, but order calmed him, or at least created the illusion that everything was under control. Each day began the same way: alarm at 6:30, coffee from that same white cup with a barely visible crack on the handle, a light jog along the waterfront, work. He knew when a client would call, when he could take a break, when he'd go to sleep. And in this predictability, he felt protected. Only in the last 2 weeks, he increasingly caught himself thinking that he was living as if in a box, accented clean, neat, but too cramped. Sometimes when he looked at his laptop screen, numbers and words blurred, merging into a gray stream. He'd blink, shake his head, and the image would become sharp. But the feeling of emptiness inside remained. At the office, they called him a machine. Reliable. Unfailing. Colleagues joked that Oliver never got sick, never ran late, never missed deadlines. He'd smile in response, but each time this praise lay heavily on his soul. Because behind this impeccability hid something else: accented fear. Fear of stopping. Fear of becoming unnecessary. Fear of discovering that beneath all this efficiency, there was nothing real. Melissa once said jokingly, "You know, honey, sometimes you look at me like you're trying to remember who I am." She laughed, but Oliver somehow couldn't. He froze, holding a glass of wine, and for several seconds actually couldn't remember what they'd been talking about a minute ago. Her face seemed familiar and foreign at the same time, like a photograph from an old album, where you recognize the person but can't bring back the feeling of closeness. The problem wasn't work. Not relationships. Not friends. The problem was him. His tired body, which he stubbornly ignored, like ignoring a crack in glass, hoping it would disappear on its own. It didn't disappear. Day 1, the crack. The first symptoms appeared at night. He woke sharply as if he'd fallen into his own body from a height. His chest ached, breathing was ragged, sticky fear spread inside. He turned on the lamp, sat on the edge of the bed trying to understand what it was. Everything in the room was as always: the shadow from the closet, soft light from the nightlight, barely audible street noise. But inside Oliver, the world was swaying. He put his hand on his chest. His heart was beating too fast, as if trying to run ahead of life itself. 120 beats per minute. Maybe more. He tried to count, but kept losing track, and that made it even scarier. Just a nightmare, he whispered to himself. But deep down something stirred, accented: what if it's not? He reached for his phone, opened the search browser. Chest pain at night. Results crashed down like an avalanche: heart attack, pulmonary embolism, arrhythmia. Each word hit like a hammer. He read the symptoms and found them all in himself. Pain. Yes. Shortness of breath. Yes. Fear of death. Oh yes, right now it was the main guest in his chest. Oliver closed the browser, but it was already too late. The seeds of anxiety sprouted instantly. The next morning he felt strange. As if everything around had shifted slightly, insignificantly, but enough to notice. His thoughts became flat, reactions slowed. Melissa was talking to him about weekend plans, and he couldn't hold her words in his head. It seemed that each sentence, barely spoken, fell to the floor and scattered. and I thought maybe we could visit my parents. They haven't seen us in a while." "Oliver." He flinched. "Yes, of course. Good idea." Melissa squinted. "Did you even hear what I said?" "I heard he lied, and this lie tasted bitter. He blamed everything on fatigue. Didn't want to think about the worst. Work, probably. Too many projects. Too little sleep. Nothing serious. But his body knew better. Day 2, the break. On the second day, the break happened, accented the first real one. He was sitting at his laptop responding to a client's email when suddenly he felt as if his head had separated from his body. Thoughts continued to work, hands typed text, but he wasn't participating in it. He was an observer. An outsider. The world became flat, like a photograph, perfect but dead. He blinked. Again. Shook his head. But the feeling didn't leave immediately. It melted slowly like fog and left behind cold, viscous anxiety. Oliver looked at his hands. They lay on the keyboard, his hands with a mole on the left wrist, with a thin scar on the index finger from childhood carelessness. But they seemed foreign. As if someone had put gloves made of someone else's skin on him. He clenched his fists. Unclenched them. Repeated. Tried to feel the connection. But between intention and action was a strange delay, as if the signal was going through bad internet. "God, what's wrong with me?" he whispered into the empty room. The room didn't answer. It just existed, indifferent, two-dimensional, devoid of depth. Melissa noticed his condition at dinner. "You're pale." "What's going on?" "Nothing." He forced a smile, though the muscles in his face barely obeyed. "Just overdid it with stress." She put down her fork, leaned closer. "Oliver, you didn't sleep last night. I heard you walking around the apartment at 3 in the morning. What happened if—" He wanted to answer honestly. Wanted to say, "I'm scared. I don't understand what's happening to my head. The world has become unreal, and I'm afraid I'm going crazy." But instead he said, "Just slept poorly. Project at work. Everything's fine." The lie hung between them, heavy and visible. He tried to convince himself too, but inside alarming guesses were already sounding. He felt that something in him had broken, or would break very soon. In the evening, he went back to the internet. This time the queries were different, feeling of unreality, world like in a dream, depersonalization. Forums, articles, videos. People described the same thing, and this made it simultaneously easier and scarier. Easier because he wasn't alone. Scarier because for some, this lasted months. Years. No, he told himself. This won't happen to me. But there was no confidence in his voice. Day 3, the collapse. On the third day, everything collapsed. Oliver was working. Nothing unusual, quiet evening, soft light, familiar rustling of keys. Outside the window, rain was falling, drops sliding down the glass, leaving winding trails. He was looking at a spreadsheet, making edits, and suddenly, as if by a snap, the world lurched. His heart jerked so sharply that he cried out. A lump appeared in his throat, hands became icy. He jumped up, trying to breathe, but the air resisted. His lungs compressed, as if wrapped in iron wire. He felt burning fear, completely primal, the kind that's impossible to confuse with anything. "I'm dying." The thought was clear, confident, final. He didn't doubt for a second. This wasn't anxiety, not panic, not emotion. This was knowledge, accented, animal, inexplicable. An instinct that screamed, "The end is near." He pressed against the wall because his legs were giving way. The world stopped having depth, began to vibrate. Sounds distorted, the rain outside the window turned into the roar of a waterfall, his own breathing into the wheeze of someone dying. The walls of the room began to breathe, expand, and contract. Or was his consciousness collapsing? He couldn't tell. Reality flowed like molten wax. He called Melissa, accented, his hands trembled so much that they barely held the phone. Mel. The eggshell was ragged. I feel really bad. Oliver, I'm already on my way. Breathe, do you hear? Just breathe. But he barely heard her. The noise of blood in his ears drowned out everything. Her voice, the room, thoughts. His body seemed like a trap. And his mind accented drowning. He slid down the wall to the floor, pressed his knees to his chest. Tried to breathe deeply as those videos advised, but each breath came with effort. The air was thick, viscous, as if he was trying to breathe underwater. How much time had passed? A minute. 10. An hour. Time became a meaningless concept. When Melissa burst into the apartment, Oliver was still sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. She dropped down beside him, hugged him. "I'm here. I'm with you. Everything will be okay." Her voice was an answer, the only solid thing in collapsing reality. The hospital. The road to the hospital was a blurred tunnel. Melissa drove with one hand, held his palm with the other. He didn't feel her warmth. It seemed that she was touching not his hand, but the hand of some other person. As if he was looking at himself through glass. In the emergency room, they laid him on a couch, connected him to monitors. Pulse oximeter. Blood pressure monitor. He looked at the numbers like at a verdict. Now they'll find something. Now they'll tell the truth. The one you can't escape. The doctor came in 20 minutes, a man about 50 with a tired face and kind eyes. He studied the data, looked at Oliver. "Your tests are normal. Your heart is healthy. Blood pressure is slightly elevated, but that's a reaction to stress. This is a panic attack. Very strong, but not life-threatening. Not dangerous." Oliver raised his eyes. They were red, full of shame and despair. "And the fact that I thought I was dying. Is that normal?" The doctor sat on the edge of the couch, spoke slowly, patiently. "It happens. A panic attack is a malfunction in the autonomic nervous system. Your brain turned on emergency mode, although there was no real threat. Stress can push the body to the point of defense, and panic becomes a way of saying enough. But I felt. I was sure. I know. Many describe it exactly that way. The sensation of approaching death is one of the most frightening symptoms. But your body wasn't failing you. It was just screaming too loudly." Oliver looked at him for a long time. Defense, the word sounded insulting. Part of him wanted to believe, part accented, screamed, "This is something terrible." "Real. Serious." The doctor handed him a referral. "I recommend seeing a psychotherapist. What's happening to you is treatable. This isn't a sentence. But you can't ignore it. Coming home." At home, he cried in front of Melissa for the first time. Not loudly, quietly, almost soundlessly. Tears flowed on their own, as if the body decided to shed excess tension. He hated himself for it. Hated weakness. Hated the feeling of helplessness. For 32 years he'd been strong, reliable, controlling. And now he sat on the couch crying and couldn't stop. Melissa hugged him the way you hug someone returning after a storm, carefully, with warmth, with boundaries. Everything will be okay. You're not alone. But Oliver felt alone more than ever in his life. Because what was happening in his head was his personal prison. Even Melissa, with all her love, couldn't go there. At night came a new level of fear, accented not panic, but emptiness. He lay there trying to breathe evenly. But the world around became unreal, walls seemed to recede, sounds distorted. He looked at his hands, moving his fingers, and each time asked himself, is this me? Are these my hands? He found no answer. Derealization enveloped him like thick haze. It didn't cause pain, only deprived the world of essence. He didn't feel like a person, only a shell with a set of thoughts. He got up, approached the mirror. Looked at his reflection. Recognized facial features, but didn't recognize the person. As if looking at a stranger who happened to look like him. "Who are you?" he whispered to the mirror. The mirror was silent. First steps toward the light. The next morning he was afraid to get out of bed. Afraid that he'd fall into reality again. That the world would turn out to be a cardboard set. Melissa came over, sat beside him, took his hand. "I found information," she said quietly. "Look." She gave him several pages printed from a psychology website. It talked about derealization and depersonalization, that it's not madness, but the brain's reaction to overload. A defense mechanism that disconnects emotional connection with reality when it becomes too intense. He read, and with each line, something inside became slightly softer. Not easier, but more understandable. Derealization is reversible. It goes away when the anxiety level decreases. You're not losing your mind. You're just overloaded. When he raised his eyes, Melissa smiled. "See, this isn't the end of the world. It's just a signal." He nodded. Not confidently, but for the first time accented with hope. That same day, he called a psychotherapist. The conversation was short, but important. The woman on the other end spoke calmly, professionally, without unnecessary pity. First session in 3 days. Bring a list of what scares you most. And a list of what helps at least a little. Oliver wrote it down. Hung up. Eggshelled. 3 days. I can hold on 3 days. Slow healing. The following days became a struggle. Each step like through viscous sand. But he moved. He started with breathing exercises. The first attempts were excruciating. His head spun, his body resisted. But after a couple of minutes, a tiny gap appeared, a small victory over chaos. Inhale for 4 counts. Hold. Exhale for 6. Repeat. At first it seemed pointless. How could breathing fix what was broken in his head? But on the 3rd day he noticed, after exercises, the world became slightly more solid. Slightly more real. Then short walks outside. 5 minutes. 10. 20. He was afraid of every step but took them as if making his way across thin ice. The first walk was to the corner of the building. He reached the nearest tree, touched the bark with his palm. It was rough, cold, real. He stood like that for a minute, maybe two, just feeling the texture of the tree. And for the first time in several days, he felt something besides fear. Melissa walked with him. Didn't push, didn't rush. Just was there. "You're doing great," she'd say after each walk. And although he didn't feel great, these words warmed him. Then attempts to work. 1 task a day. 2 emails. 1 call. Even on these calls, he sometimes caught himself thinking that he was looking at people like at movie characters. Voices muffled, faces as if not real. But he kept focus. Kept himself together. Clients didn't notice. Colleagues didn't notice. For everyone, he remained the same Oliver, professional, composed. Only he knew what effort it took to hold this mask. Each evening he wrote down small victories in a notebook. Sometimes victories were minutes. Today didn't think about going crazy for 10 minutes. Today was able to laugh at Melissa's joke. Today the world was real for a whole half hour. Sometimes just that he lived through the day. First session with the therapist. The psychotherapist's office turned out to be unexpectedly cozy. Soft chair, warm, light bookshelves. No cold white walls as he'd imagined. Samantha Gray was a woman about 40 with an attentive gaze and a quiet voice. She didn't ask stupid questions like "What are you feeling?" Instead she said, "Tell me about the day when it all started." And Oliver told her. About the night when he woke with a pounding heart. About the second day when the world became flat. About the third when he thought he was dying. Samantha listened without interrupting. When he finished, she nodded. "Your brain was trying to protect you. It just chose an unfortunate method. Panic is an ancient fight or flight mechanism. But when the threat isn't physical but internal, it misfires. And scares even more. How do I stop it? Learn to tell your brain there's no danger. It's not fast, but it's possible." They began working. Cognitive behavioral therapy. Each week Oliver came, brought his notes, talked about triggers, about fears, about small victories. Samantha taught him to notice distorted thoughts. "I'm doing exaggeration. I'm going crazy, catastrophizing. This will never end," black and white thinking. "What if it's true?" he asked once. "What if it's not?" she replied. "What evidence do you have?" And he realized there was no evidence. Only fear pretending to be truth. The return. 2 months passed. Oliver still sometimes felt derealization, especially in stressful moments. But now he knew it would pass. That it wasn't forever. He learned to slow down. Refused 2 projects at work. Started sleeping 8 hours. Stopped checking his phone at night. Started going to yoga, and although the first class almost ended in a panic attack, by the 5th he could already relax. One evening he stood on the balcony, looking at the city. The air was dense, cool, and life could be felt in it. Lanterns below flickered, cars crawled along roads, music played somewhere. And for the first time in a long while, he could feel the moment, not with his head, but with his body. The world was real. Alive. 3-dimensional. Melissa came over, leaned against his shoulder, hugged him. "You've become stronger," she said. "I'm proud of you." I just don't want to be afraid anymore, he answered quietly. Enough. She took his hand, intertwined fingers with his. You know what I like. What? You're here again. For real. Not in that box where you lived before. But here, with me. And in that second he understood, those 3 days hadn't destroyed him, they'd stopped his previous path, which had long been going the wrong way. They forced him to slow down, stop, look inside. Of course, fears didn't disappear completely. Sometimes at night he still woke with a racing heartbeat. Sometimes the world became slightly less bright. But now he knew this will pass. He knew the tools. He knew he wasn't alone. And inside there was still much work left. Many fears. Many questions. But most importantly, accented, he remained himself. And for the first time in a long while, that seemed enough. He looked at Melissa, smiled, and it was a real smile, coming not from politeness, but from warmth inside. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For not leaving. When I was not myself. She hugged him tighter. You were yourself. Just yourself, who was in a lot of pain. And I'm not going anywhere. The city below lived its life. Oliver stood on the balcony, held the hand of the person he loved and breathed. Evenly, calmly, and the world was real.